that so often we set off for goals. We set off, from college with so much excitement with how our life is going to turn out, with how we expect it to be. Or we even claim that because we worked so hard, it should go this way. I expect it to. That's what I earned. And it doesn't. Real life is met with so many challenges and surprises and losses and heartache. That's actually a real life. But the beauty in all of that is what we choose to do with it and how we respond to it. When things don't go our way, who are we in that? When we lose everything, who are we? And, 2021 was a really powerful year for me because even though I'd been in the sport for so long, it was my mind that got me to that finish line. You get to choose. Everything can fall apart, but you get to choose that strength. You get to choose to keep writing that story. Your mind is the most powerful muscle that you have. And it should be something that we work on every single day. And there's a lot of different ways that we can work on it. It's not just showing up to train. It's how we interact with people around us. How do we interact, in just everyday challenges?
You're listening to the Born Primitive Podcast. Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the Born Primitive Podcast. Morning, Tone. How we doing?
Good morning, Bear. I'm doing good.
Spring's coming, man. The birds are chirping. That weather's warming up. I'm feeling good.
Feeling good.
That's right, man. So today's guest, she's an absolute badass, Sally McRae. We're really excited for this one. Sally is a professional ultramarathon runner, author, coach, motivational speaker, and the host of the Choose Strong podcast. You can also get her latest book, Choose Strong, The Choice That Changes Everything, and watch her ultramarathon documentaries, Racing TAHOE and Every Step Forward on her YouTube channel. And she's also pretty popular on Instagram. You can follow her at Yellow Runner. So Sally McRae, welcome to the Born Primitive Podcast.
Stoked to be here, guys. Thanks for having me.
So I want to dive right in. I think typically when we have guests that have written books, like that's the best place to start because there's so much we can unpack. So talk us about what inspired your book, what made you want to write it. And for the viewers, can you give them, kind of a synopsis of what all it contains?
Yeah. So it's a 2-part memoir series. I'm working on the second part right now. So the first one, Choose Strong, covers the first 18 years of my life. And I'd say that there's a couple motivations in wanting to get that story out there. One of the title of the book, Choose Strong, is something that I often say. Another thing I often say is do the work. And I believe that, choosing strong is about, it's not just a physical, thing that we choose. I think, living in a world of social media, we like to put strength out there in the physical sense. So it's the lifting weights and putting in the training. And, and I think it makes us feel like we have value when we're putting in those training days, and we feel tougher and stronger when we do that. But I think the real message that I was trying to get to was that strength is not just physical. It's very much mental. It's something that we choose and how we interact with people and how we live our lives. And some of the hardest things that we do in life are not in the gym. It's not in competition. It's sometimes it comes down to forgiveness. Walking through loss and tragedy, trying to navigate real everyday situations in life takes a lot of strength. And I think that a lot of the stories aren't highlighted as much as, physical endeavors. And I really felt like with the platform that I have as a professional athlete, it's so easy to talk about, these medals and I've done this and done that. But I really believe that the strength that I've known started as a little girl. And I'm able to take that and apply it into my everyday life and especially in competition. So the story that I share in that book was one that was probably most shocking to everyone reading it because I didn't talk about it. But it laid the foundation for who I am today. And I think that, I talk about loss and abuse, working 2 jobs at a very, very young age. And then working through just a lot of really, really tough life situations that just pretty much continued throughout my entire childhood and into my teen years. So, the goal is to encourage other people to do the same in their life, to choose strong, and to know that no matter what life throws you, you can get through it. You're equipped for the life that you've been given, even if it feels really crappy.
And was that kind of realization you made, like, was it gradual, or did something very specific happen where you kind of realized, okay, I have a choice here. I can choose to be strong. And, obviously that's the title of your book.
Yeah.
How did you evolve to adopt that mindset?
I think so often that when I was in high school, my mom was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And I talk about this in the book. I was a freshman in high school. And, when you're hit with hard points in your life, I think there's a couple things that go on. One, you feel isolated in that. You feel kind of alienated, especially as a child, when, you know, everyday life happenings are around sports and the boy that you like and what you're getting in this class. And it's, you think in your mind that it shouldn't feel so heavy and so hard. And I know at that time, I didn't feel like I could talk to anybody about it. None of my friends or anyone in school that I knew was going through what I was going through. I had an abusive father growing up too. And I also didn't have any friends that worked like I did. So a lot of points in my life, I felt alone. And growing up in the church, I remember people would say like one-liners to me, that, God doesn't give you anything that you can't handle. And, that this is going to matter one day, just, keep pushing forward. And when my mom died when I was 17, and then every month after her death, some pretty rough, tumultuous things continued to happen. I remember thinking about how much I resented just random statements that were said to me. And as I grew older into my teens and in my 20s, I understood how powerful phrases are, motivational phrases that we just say them. And sometimes they can make us feel great for a couple of days. Sometimes that's something we hold on to. But if there is no root from which it comes, if there's no understanding or really a base of what those words mean, they eventually don't mean anything to us, and they can't get us out of those hard places. So for me, what I realized as I got older is I need to have something to stand on. And I need to understand that that words are incredibly powerful, but they also have to be followed up with what is true and what is good and what is lasting, and they have to be proven. And so that's really where Choose Strong came from. I think I know I'm known in the community for being a bigger, more muscular endurance athlete. I talk about lifting all the time, but I really wanted to tell a story that had roots. Strength is something that we get to choose. And when I turned 18, this is now less than a year after my mom passed away, my dad was arrested on campus at my high school, in front of my whole high school. And my sisters were taken to foster care. And this was in the midst of so many other life events that were happening. And I drove home by myself to a house that was once a family of 7, and I was all alone. And I remember just being furious and thinking, I've lived my whole life always having things be hard. Why is life worth continuing on? Because people keep telling me that it's going to get better, that all this is going to mean something, and all that it is greater and greater pain. So why should I keep moving on? And I laid on the floor of my living room contemplating life and whether or not I should continue on. And the most powerful thing that got me off that ground were the words that my mom had said to me in the weeks leading up to her death. And she was a great encourager too. But she always encouraged me to keep going, to keep pursuing my dreams and whatever it is that was in my heart. And she had a very, very strong faith. Even up until the day she died, she was quoting scripture. So what I understood to be strength was something that we choose. We choose it in the face of death. We choose it in the face of pain and loss. And that was just the choice that I made. I'm going to get myself up off this ground and choose to continue living my life and choose to hope and believe that there actually is purpose in why I'm here.
Wow, that's incredible. Yeah, I'm just putting myself in your shoes. You know, your mother passes, your father gets arrested, he's in jail. I'm guessing your sisters get taken, and you go home to an empty house, with probably the weight of the world on your shoulders. And that's such a moving story. So what was your response? Obviously, you had the kind of that moment. What happened immediately after that, and how did you pick yourself up?
Yeah, I mean, I actually on that day, I mean, I'm laying there as the sun has gone down and the house is dark. And, I remember just sitting myself up and leaning myself up against the wall and pretty much just telling myself, like, I need one to be there for my sisters. I mean, there's so many things that you have to get practical and logical. That's what I kept telling myself. Like, if I can take my eyes off of myself, because I believe sometimes when we're in greatest despair, we can sink further into it because we keep focusing on our despair. We keep focusing on what we don't have and how terrible we feel. And so knowing that my sisters had been taken away, I wasn't able to say goodbye to them. That was a huge motivation for me. And that was something that I remembered about my mom throughout my entire life. She was always caring for other people. She was the first one that really introduced me to, orphaned children, kids that were in foster care. I didn't really understand what that was, but that was really important to her. This idea that we should take care of others, take care of people who have nothing, who don't have families, who are forgotten. And now here it was, my sisters were in that place. And that was like a nightmare. I never thought that would happen. So I knew that taking my eyes off of myself would be really helpful in helping me move forward if I focused on them and being able to see them. So it took me about 4 weeks, but I was able to get guardianship. I wasn't able to take them out of foster care because my dad eventually came home and I had nowhere to go with them. But I was able to go and visit them in foster care and have some connection with them. And really, it was just choosing to move forward and not sit in that pain, not sit in the situation.
And how did you find yourself then? Because like what I hear here is like, and it's such a powerful message, is and delivered with so much humility, which is like a compliment to you and just a groundedness, is that like you had a crisis strike that I think is hard for any of us to relate to. Like Bear said, and you yourself said, so many variables happening at once that completely shake the foundation in which you use to kind of operate in your daily life. But it sounds like, listening to you talk now and even prepping for the podcast, like the word that came to mind, because I'm a Carl Jung kind of nerd, is like the wounded healer. Like it comes through in your words that like, when you're talking, when you're delivering a message, there's no fluff to it. There's no like inspirational kind of facade to cover up like a shallowness in the actual thought you're delivering. Like you can tell you're speaking from real life examples, and there's a heaviness to it, but almost a lightness at the same time. And that's why I bring up the wounded healer, meaning like somebody who has gone through extreme crisis, but then realizes the only way to kind of heal that within themselves is to heal others. And that's what I hear even there. Right away, you were able to realize like, oh my gosh, like, yes, this feels miserable to me, but how can I still help those also affected by the situation? Because that actually will, in effect, heal yourself. So how did, I guess the question for me, because it's almost ironic, Bear, we had another ultra marathoner on the podcast, and she talked about how she had a huge transition through when she was racing her first, I think she said like 5 years, she was running away from things that had happened to her in her past. Like literally that was her inspiration, was like, and it wasn't even conscious at the time, but then slowly she started to realize like, this isn't sustainable. Like what I'm doing is not sustainable. I'm running, instead of like enjoying what I'm doing this just to run from something. And she was able to make the switch then she said she had a really strong coach that was actually kind of helping point that out, that like, hey, you seem angry in everything you're doing. So the question I'd love to ask for you, because I see some parallels in this story, is Was that a driving force for you? Like having gone through these crises, gone through these extreme, like kind of pains and suffering, did you find yourself kind of attracted to the ultra marathon world as a way to kind of escape those things you had gone through?
No, not at all. And I think that that is a really, a really strong point that I always talk about.
Mm-hmm.
I even have a chapter in my book. I put these little snippets of poetry throughout the book, and one of them is called Registration for Pain. And the whole message in that is talking about how so often, you know, we really glorify these hard races, these long races as, oh my gosh, you're so tough, you're so gritty, that's incredible you did that. And it is, it's amazing to understand what our bodies are capable of. I genuinely believe that we as humans don't understand, and on average, don't understand how much we can endure. And I always say, hey, if I can do it, you can do it too. But the real tough, hard races in life have nothing to do with what we sign up for. I think that ultra marathon races, you know, you choose to do it. You have this idea and this excitement about doing it, and you sign up for it. But it is a very structured event, and anything that you go through in that, you signed up for. At any time you can drop out. At any time, you know, you have a crew and volunteers that are cheering you on, that are taking care of you and coddling you. And it's a really sweet way to do something difficult and to push yourself, because there's a safety net there. But what I know to be true of life is there's a lot of very difficult races that millions and millions of people have to wake up to every day, that they wish they could DNF, that they wish that they could quit and stop and walk away from. They wish they had a crew taking care of them. And so, you know, I actually grew up as a soccer player. I played soccer for almost 20 years. I had a dream of becoming a professional athlete. I'd loved sports since I was a little girl. But I also started running when I was 7 years old. I started racing. I was winning every race in the city and in the county. I genuinely have always had a very pure love for running. And by the time I was 10 or 11, I also knew that I had massive endurance. So I had so much energy growing up. I love gymnastics. I love soccer. I love running, and I love being outside all day long. So that was just always just a natural part of who I was. And becoming a professional soccer player, the older I got, really for me was the focus of how I was gonna be able to move out of the house and go to college. I was gonna be the first person in my entire family on both sides to go to college. So it was more of a goal-oriented, genuine love. Like sport has always been just a part of my life. So I played a little bit after college, and then when I got married, I was a soccer coach and a freshman English teacher, and I started doing marathons just for fun to stay in shape, and I was lifting. And it was really curiosity that drove me into ultra marathons. But I've always been very keen to this idea. Even when I first entered ultra marathons, I would hear people say oh, it's a bunch of exercise obsessed, exercise addicted people are in that sport. And it's a bunch of people running away from their problems. And I made sure to identify that about myself. Dude, is that why I'm doing this? No, it is not 100%. The biggest thing that I love about ultramarathons is that you run through the mountains. So I typically choose races that are in the mountains, because since the time I was a little kid, that I love just being in the mountains. And I have some really wonderful memories of my, as a child in the mountains. So I think it's really wise with anything in our life that we spend a lot of time doing, that we ask ourselves, if this was taken away, who are you? And if you have a hard time defining that, then you need to look at why you do what you do. And that has always been something that I have evaluated year after year. And even before I was signed, I actually ran a lot of ultramarathons in 2010. And then in 2011, I didn't do anything. And I spent that whole entire year defining and asking myself why I wanted to do these races. And I had babies at the time. I had 2 kids. They were 1 and 3 years old when I started. And so I knew it would be a big commitment. But that first year, I was doing really well. I was placing well. And then in 2012, I went back to racing and tried to balance it well as a mother and see if I could still do it while running my fitness business. And then 2014, I was signed by Nike. So there was a very calculated, very well thought out way in which I entered the world of ultras. I didn't take it lightly, but I also made sure that I would not be pinned as someone who is running away from anything. I don't believe in that. And I'm incredibly very aware of that.
Yeah, really, really insightful. And by no means, I apologize for like, I wasn't not making the assumption that that's why you were doing it.
Oh, no,
I just heard it was the stories.
I wasn't offended.
Yeah, the stories were very parallel. So I'd love to, and I've heard you talk a little bit about this. You just mentioned, I think you said 2010 when you had a 1 and 3 year old. Bear has a 3-year-old, and I have a 4-month-old or a 5-month-old and a 2-year-old. So just we often are discussing on the podcast kind of finding balance in this new season of our lives, and kind of what that looks like as two people who were collegiate athletes and then just have a genuine, like you do, a genuine love for fitness and just moving. So I would love for you to kind of unpack kind of the seasons you've gone through as such an extreme athlete in while maintaining being a mother, and kind of, I'm sure, the ups and downs of what that's looked like and the insights you're able to provide people regarding those kind of changes.
Yeah. And again, I was not offended at all. Question.
Yeah.
I think it's a great question, and it is something that I've been asked a lot. It's something I actually speak to quite a bit. But at the root of just who I am and how I've always done life, I love just being outside. I love lifting. I love using my body. And I love encouraging people in their goals and dreams and whatever that looks like. So I've always kind of gravitated toward teaching, coaching, training other people. And so when my kids were 1 and 3, I had, at the time, I was like 2 years into this fitness business that I had started. So I was training people in strength, in running. I had an outdoor boot camp style type fitness class. So I was doing everything I could, not only to bring in money for the family, but I would do those at 5 a.m. because at 5 a.m. nobody needed me. And that just worked. And then Eddie, my husband, would work all day long. So I would raise the kids all day, try and get in some training myself, and then, work on the business while the kids were taking a nap. What I learned at probably, by the time my kids were 1 and 3, when I was trying out these ultras, was, even though I was placing well, I got really excited. I was like, oh, wow, like I'm actually doing okay at these. That just fired me up because I'm naturally very competitive. And I was like, I want to train for these right. I know what it takes to train for them right. And I was met with so much frustration because children aren't plants. People say, if you want to have kids, get a plant, get a dog. No, not the same. It is way different, and you're raising humans that are unique. They have their own personalities and their own way of doing things. And I really felt, being a mom was, and still is, the absolute greatest gift of my life. Nothing has brought me more joy and fulfillment than being a parent. And I wanted to do it right, but I also had a lot inside of me. Like, I also still had all like these dreams and ideas and curiosities. And I wondered at that time, is it still possible to do both? Because society kind of teaches you as a mother that you are in 24/7, that it's somewhat selfish if you put yourself first before your kids at any time during the day, at any time during the week. And, Eddie was really supportive of me, knew what I loved to do. He was a soccer player in college too. So we were both athletes. Like he understood. So instead of being frustrated, I thought, well, I can't do a conventional training plan. And I also have no idea how each day is going to be, but what can I do? And that was really what changed my entire mindset. Was, instead of being frustrated about not being able to assimilate what everyone else was doing online, not being able to stick to a conventional training plan like maybe a coach would give me, I'm going to figure out a path that is going to work for my life while being a good mom, and figure out what I can do to be the best athlete that I can be. And I didn't put like a timestamp on it. I think that was a big deal for me too. It wasn't like, in 10 months, I better be here. And if not, then, all of this was worth nothing. So each day I tried to craft out some type of schedule. I didn't have rigid parenting. So I didn't like the idea of like, you have to take a nap at this time. You have to eat at this time. It was like, hey, when we're tired, we're going to nap. When we're hungry, we're going to eat. And because I was like that, my kids actually kind of fell into their own natural routine. And so then I figured out, all right, they sleep for like an hour and a half. I can do like a HIIT workout in the garage. I can put them in the double stroller. I can get some miles in. And then the local gym, there's a grand opening and they offered free childcare and it was up to 2 hours. So my first ultra, actually, I trained about 85% for my first 50-mile race in the gym on a treadmill. And looking back on that, if any coach were to get a hold of my training schedule or see the workouts that I was doing and when I was doing them and how often, sometimes it would take me 3 runs in a day just to get 9 miles in. I think every coach would be like, well, this is messy. This doesn't make any sense. And I was like, I don't care if it makes sense to anyone else. This makes sense to me. This is my story. This is my life. This is my dream. And I'm going to carve it out the way that I want to. No one gets to be the boss of my life, of my children, and what it is that I love. And so what I do know to be true is that consistent hard work changes you over time. And some days I'll be able to get 20 minutes of training in. Some days I'll be able to get 4 hours of training in, but all of it matters. And I just kept telling myself that. And ultimately, it put me on a path to becoming a professional athlete.
Yeah, that's so cool. I mean, we can definitely relate. That 90-minute nap becomes absolute gold when you're a busy parent. You know what I mean?
When you get 2 though, and they're not on the same schedule.
Yeah. Well, mine getting those weekend naps doesn't really happen anymore. So, but we know that the parents that are listening know the value of that moment where you're running around, you got to do the dishes and the laundry, hit a workout in the garage.
Oh yeah,
I love that. Well, I think one thing I want to pull out of this that has been a common theme we talked about before, but it's this balance of pursuing your own passions and still being your own individual. And I think a lot of us, when we have kids, it's like, all right, it's not about you anymore, which I think is for the most part, true. But at the same time, you still can have your own identity. And I also think it's important that we emphasize that, because I see some parents that kind of just like throw in the towel on anything that is like personal to them. And, I would say particularly, more on the lady side too, which it's a testament to them being such dedicated mothers, but they lose all of their own identities and their own passions. And I think it's one of those things you got to still fill your own cup. So you can still be, the best version of yourself for your kids. Right. And it's incredible to see how you've balanced that and how you became, you were an elite athlete, but I mean, you became the best of the best while balancing all that. I love that treadmill story of that's so perfect for, you adapted to the environment you were in and you were still a present mother, but you still made it happen within the parameters that you had. And I think for anyone listening that feels like they've lost, their identity or any of their own personal passions, like I think part of that is a choice. And I would challenge you to say, all right, did you really lose them or did you kind of concede those, with little resistance? And I think your story is just incredible. It's just, very humbling to hear that. So thank you for sharing that.
I think a lot of moms and just single parents as a whole, they are met with a lot of guilt. And I actually spoke about this in a podcast a few weeks ago. I challenge you in that guilt to go search out where it came from. Because most often we are our worst critics. Yeah. We are the ones who actually put the ideas and those thoughts in our own head. And it could be triggered by someone, it could be triggered by social media, but where actually does it come from? What are the roots of that guilt? And I find that it can start in the home in which you're raised. So if you had a mom that raised you in a certain way, you think this is exactly how I need to raise my kids too. My mom never worked out. She never ever went out with her girlfriends. Like, she was home full time. She was there whenever we needed her. She waited in the car for an hour and a half at our soccer practice. I mean, there are kids who grew up with mothers like that, and they feel like that is the role of the mother. But really, what is the role of the mother? So seek out where the guilt comes from. what the role of the mother is, but I also have to, and I had to do this a lot when the kids were toddlers and preschool. I realized that being a mother, being a parent, just as a whole, whether you're a father or mother, you have been given this incredible opportunity to influence, inspire, and love a human that is going to go out into the world. And what is it that they're going to do? What is it as a parent you hope that your child will do? Well, I know a lot of parents say, I just want my kid to be happy. I want them to do what they're passionate about. I want them to do what they love. And it's so interesting because I often then say, are you doing that? Are you doing what you love? Are you happy? It's always the forward facing. Well, I'm going to sacrifice everything that I am so that someone else can be happy. And I think as a parent, we learn very quickly how selfish we are, right? I mean, being a parent is so humbling. It's when you have that little baby, you realize like, oh my gosh, I think about myself so much. And now I have to think about this human. It's a really hard transition. But what if we were able to show our kids that life isn't about being totally perfect and everything going well all the time? And there's also a balance in there. We care for our others. We should love one another. We should put others before ourselves, but also we should love the life that we've been given. We should also continue to pursue the things that we love. And the reason why we're here, like we have purpose on this earth, and it doesn't stop when you become a parent. Being a parent is an incredible gift, but we get to raise the kids and show them what it looks like to keep working hard every single day. And so, showing up for yourself for that workout, it isn't just about you and fitting into your pair of jeans. And I think sometimes women think that if I go train, it's all about me and losing weight and looking. No, it's not. Like you're healthier and stronger and fitter, and you are more enduring for your kids. Like you're going to be able to show up a lot better for them, but you're also literally showing them how important moving your body is. And that is the best way to live a life for that total well-being. And so when you drop your kids off at soccer practice for them to train, and then you decide just to sit in the car for an hour and a half, what is the message that you're giving them? Because you could get out and go on the same field and run around that field with them. You could walk around the field while they train. And if they ask you, Mom, why do you do laps around my soccer fields? Because you're getting your training in, I'm getting my training in, and we both feel better after we get our training in, don't we? Or I'm training for this 10K, and so I know I have to get my miles in, and you need to get your training in. And so I'm going to run around the soccer field and train for my 10K while you're training for that soccer tournament this Saturday. I mean, how cool to do it as a team, to help the kids understand what it looks like to support one another's dreams. And that is really a more rounded, more balanced way to teach children. We're not sacrificing who we are, but we're showing them this is what it looks like to continue to work hard and to go after goals. And I want you to do that too.
Yeah, there can be, and it's tricky. And I'll just relate it to myself because I've gone through it in these first 2 years. There can be a bit of like self-loathing where like so much has changed in your life that like you kind of submit to like, well, this is just the way it is now. And then you do that for, at least myself, you do that for a couple weeks and it's like, oh, I feel disgusting when I like embody that. And it's exactly what you said. Like, it's like gilded in the sense that like that thought seems good on the surface that like, oh, I'm just sacrificing for my children. But it actually underneath it, if you peel back the layers, and I'll just speak of myself, like there is some like self-loathing and just rationalization happening that like, it's more because your reality that you used to know got scrambled. And instead of getting stronger and adjusting to that, you kind of feel you kind of feel chaotic and you just submit to it. And I think that's actually part, like that submission in like any chaotic period, you're going to feel that for a while, but then hopefully you grow stronger and move out of it. But like you do see some people, and once again, I'll just relate to myself. I've been there where like you get stuck. And if you stay stuck in that thing and continue to rationalize that you're doing it for other people, it can end up in a tricky spot. But it is tough. I mean, now we're getting into the dealings of the mind, which is a whole nother, like to try to unpack that for people is a crazy thing, but go ahead.
Yeah. I think one more thing to add to it is not only do people concede their own identity, but also, and this doesn't apply to me, but it does to you, like in their marriage, people kind of concede like the emphasis on their marriage and it's all about the kids. And right. And before you know it, maybe both people have kind of let themselves go and there's no romance anymore. And you know what I mean? And I've seen some good content online saying like, hey, by focusing on your marriage, you're actually, you're going to help your kids out. Don't do the opposite. Now, of course, still take care for your kids, but man, I see that way too much, where it's like there's 3 kids running around and, they look nothing like they used to as parents. And there's just the spark is gone because it's just chaos. And it's like, all right, well, you've submitted to that, right? I know it's hard, but if you carved out a date night once a week and alone time and that vacation that you two go on once a year, whatever that is. But so I think, not only do you need to worry about your own, your own passions, but if you are someone married, you need to make sure that you're still focusing on them, and it's not all just, it's just all about the kids. But I know that's easier said than done,
for sure.
So.
Yeah, big time.
Yeah.
And that's great. Grace is so important, Grace, to know that like, you don't know what the day is going to bring. And, I had 2 kids in less than 2 years. They're both born in March. I had Isaiah 2 weeks later, Mackenzie turned 2, but they were both traumatic emergency C-sections. And so I bring home a newborn baby, but I'm recovering from stomach surgery on top of that. And I always like to bring up this story because I know that for every, family, both the husband and wife, that transition, when that baby comes home, everything that happens in those weeks following is new. It's wild. Like, for a woman is like, oh my gosh, what just happened to my body? And why does it look this way? And there's sadness that comes with that and frustration that comes with that. I mean, and I'm always like, dude, that's the time you turn off all social media. Do not be scrolling through social media in those first 6 weeks postpartum. But it's like, it is a wild, messy, erratic introduction to what it's like to be a parent. And it's the most extreme for your first one. It's the most extreme in those initial months. And it's also beautiful and precious and amazing too. But what I found as the months went on, and just to kind of go off of what you guys were saying, was, I definitely had weeks where I was like, well, this is just how my life is. And I'm going to stay in my sweats and I'm not going to go outside. And like the laundry's piling up and the dishes are piling up and I can't wait until Eddie gets home from work. And, we'd have like this hour of interaction before I just wanted to pass out in bed because I was so exhausted. And, I had days where I was like, is this how it's going to be like always now? And then you like mourn what it was like when you didn't have kids. And so I think for all parents, it's important to understand there is a season and a time for everything, and it's constantly changing. And if you believe that and understand that, that actually is what helps you get through each day. Is you do not have a newborn for 18 years. They change a lot in those first 2 years. And then they go to elementary school, and oh my gosh, all that free time in elementary school, that changes a lot. Some of us go back to work. Some of us, start up businesses at home and, do other things in the community. I mean, life is always changing, and your children are always changing, and they themselves are growing and they're learning. And guess what? They're doing all that alongside you. And I think it's so important that we stay real through all of it. And communication is powerful. And the realization that we are not perfect humans. We're not raising perfect humans. And some days are going to be really, really messy. And I say, proceed with grace. Do the best with what you have on any given day. But remember that you can't control what happened yesterday. You can't control what's going to happen tomorrow. But you can just do the best with what you have. And guess what? Some days are just going to be terrible days. And like 4 or 5 years, you'll look back and laugh about it. Maybe not in the moment, but you'll look back and laugh, and you might even miss those days.
And did you find that, Sally? Did you find yourself with that grace as you were going through those beginning stages? Or is this something now, as you said, you've been through the ringer now, you've been in the game for a lot longer than Bear and I. Is that something in retrospect that emerged in you, or did you kind of start to pick up on that? Because even just hearing your story about you carving out time to go to the gym while they had a 2-hour sitting session there at the gym, and like it sounds very clean there, but I'm sure, as you just described, it was that if you actually zoom in and look at the day to day, it was messier than how you described it. But kind of on the macro level, were you able to pull those trends of grace and stuff in the moment, or did it take a lot of time to really reflect and have that emerge?
Yeah, it took years. I mean, the first 2-3 years of being a parent was, I went through every gamut of emotion and trying to figure things out. Because before I had kids, I was pretty good at like structuring my days, and I I'm used to I was, from the time I was in high school, very used to putting in, 10-hour work days. So work and the grind, like I am all about that. And it's 7 days a week. Like that's just what I knew. So you throw kids in the mix of that, and that's not how it works. Like you don't have these fluid days. And so I experience more internal frustration that my days are not going the way that they used to be, and I want them to, and I'm not as productive as I used to be. And I can't even like talk on the phone without one of them crying. And like, it was me constantly trying to understand, going back to, well, what is it that you actually want? What is the most important thing in your life right now? And that really helped me just recenter. What is the most important thing right now? These two little babies that are crawling up on my lap are the most important thing. I do have this business that I need to get to, but like maybe I can push that to when they're taking a nap. Maybe when Eddie gets home, I can take an hour. And so that's what it became to be. It was like, have grace, be flexible, fit things in where you can, do the best of what you have. But the most important thing, are these kids right now. And, when the gym opened up and offered free childcare at the gym, I'll tell you what, it was 40% of the time that I could actually get through a workout. And that was really frustrating because
I know that.
I would be like 22 minutes into like a tempo run on the treadmill, and I'd hear, can we get Sally McRae? And it was like a blown out diaper.
Oh man, that hits.
My daughter, my son's like diarrhea all up the back, and he's just smiling at me. And my daughter's screaming, crying because she just wants mama. And I would leave the gym crying. I mean, it's just pure frustration, or it's like, okay, this is what I have to deal with. And then it dawned on me. I was like, I don't want to actually be a mom that's like bitter and upset all the time. My kids aren't a burden. And I also don't like this idea of calling my kids a job. They're not a job. If I look at them as a gift, then I'm going to unveil actually what all the beautiful parts of why they exist and why I get to be their mom. And as the years went on, especially as, now today, as I'm still competing professionally, gosh, my kids have grounded me over and over and over again, reminding me what the most important things in life are about. Because, at the end of the day and at the end of the life, when we cross that very last finish line in life, I'm not going to be asking for my medals on my deathbed. I'm going to ask for my family and those closest to me to be around me. And I think that, keeping that at the forward, as my forward mindset, and not be so obsessed with how well a workout is going to go. Some days it will, sometimes it won't. And I think that we can look at our careers and realize that too. Like sometimes you're going to hit those sales goals and sometimes you're not. And it doesn't matter if you are the top NBA player or not. Sometimes you're going to go to the championships and get that ring, and then sometimes you're not. So I think it's just, you have to lean into grace. You have to. We aren't perfect. That's like creepy almost to think of trying to be perfect. And so in those earlier years, it took me a couple of years. It wasn't just overnight, but I had to eventually let go of rigidness, let go of perfectionism, and say, I'm going to live a real life, and I'm okay with how messy it is. But I'm starting to learn that is actually how it's supposed to be.
Well, it's super cool to hear that, because one of our athletes, Ariel Lowen, she was the fittest American woman, fittest in quotes, in the CrossFit. That's how they define it. And she's a mom, and we kind of had a similar conversation where she trained in her garage. She's, finished third at the CrossFit Games, but she was literally training like 90 minutes to 2 hours a day, like in her garage. When, in CrossFit with pro CrossFitters, like some of these people are training 5-6 hours a day, and they're getting massage therapy, and they're getting their cryo chamber, and like it's so like regimented, and like the volume is insane. I would argue probably too much. But she was just like, hey, for a while she was literally just going and doing the daily class, and then ended up winning like the Granite Games, right? And it was just so wild to hear that was just her scenario. But she was still able to be elite. So the fact that you got to the pinnacle of your sport while adopting that approach is just so impressive. And hopefully it's a, kind of a message to anyone that while in a perfect world, if you didn't have kids, you would follow a very regimented kind of scientific program that was rooted in something that, science or whatever. But hey, if you don't have that and you have other responsibilities, there's still a way to be elite, and still be a high achiever. So it's just, wild, because I know I wanted to shift gears a little bit to the Badwater, because I know you won that in 2021. So my question is that the Badwater 135, is that the baddest race on the planet? And how, because that's right through the desert, right? And it's super hot. Like, is that the whole idea?
Yeah. It's deemed, the tagline is toughest foot race on the planet, but you start in the Badwater Basin, just a couple 100 feet below sea level. And then the original course takes you from there 146 miles to the top of Mount Whitney, which is the highest point in the lower 48 states. So that was the original course. Now with permits and stuff, we only go 135 miles, and you go up to about 8,300 feet. So you stop at the Mount Whitney Trail entrance. That's the finish line. So yeah, the idea is lowest to the highest point. So you run through the desert, fully exposed, gets up to 130 Fahrenheit. There's no cover. There's about 18,000 feet of climbing. There's 3 like pretty massive passes that you have to do through the desert. And then you make your way up a 5,000 foot climb over the course of 12 miles to get to the top of, to the finish line. So you're, in a way, you're running through the desert to the mountains. It's a beautiful, beautiful race, but yeah, it's insanely tough.
Is that the hardest then, do you think?
The heat, definitely. I think if there wasn't the heat factor, it wouldn't be as hard. But there's no place on the planet that's hot, that has a race. So that's definitely what makes it the hardest. And I've done 250-mile races. So, Badwater is it's in a league of its own.
And how did you, like, as far as your development as an ultra marathoner, how did it change over the years? Was this something you kind of were able to step into and be elite right away, or did it take some time for you to build up to that?
Yeah, the distance, of course, the further you go, obviously the pace is definitely getting away from like a road marathon. It's just a different, I mean, I like to talk about it as its own sport. I think when I first entered the sport, I really wanted the metrics. I wanted to know what I was going to be running every single mile. I wanted to nail an exact finishing time, which you can pretty much do in like half marathons and road marathons. You can get down to about 5 minutes within what you think that you're going to run. You can pick your pace that you're in, train for that pace. Ultras are very humbling, and no 2 courses are the same. And I think that's actually why I fell deeper in love with the sport, because it can't be perfected. Even the same course can have wildly different weather. It could have a reroute, one year, but you think of a race like UTMB, Ultra Trail du Mont Blanc. It starts in France. You run into Italy, you run into Switzerland, and back into France. You circumnavigate Mont Blanc. It's 106 miles. You climb 38,000 feet along the way. I've done that race 5 times. And I remember one particular race getting sunburned during the day and then hitting a snowstorm at the top of the mountain in the Italian Alps, and realizing like you can't pinpoint a pace per mile and perfect these races, because you are thrown with so much, whether it's learning how to run in altitude, if you're up at 10, 11, 12,000 feet, trying to run well. If you're running through the desert at 130 degrees Fahrenheit, if you're running through rivers, up volcanoes, through jungles, it really becomes more of an adventure of endurance. And really, it comes down to what is going on between your 2 ears and what you believe that you can endure, especially when you're racing. So I think in the beginning, I was just a really fit, enduring athlete. I started lifting weights when I was like 15, 16 years old. And I never, ever, ever stopped lifting weights. And then I was a soccer player for most of my life. So I had a lot of endurance. I had speed, I had power. And so taking that into ultras, it actually transferred over really well. I mean, could barrel down the side of the mountain really well, and my legs wouldn't fatigue. All those years of agility training and explosive training, I was able to get through like really technical trails really quick because I could put my feet up really quickly. And then, of course, just the endurance part, going for a long time and not stopping. I loved that. I thought that was like incredible. I remember being so shocked after I finished my first 50-mile race. So it really was a journey of understanding what the human body is capable of doing things that I had never done before. I think I was really excited. I was enthusiastic. I really, really loved it. Like I found a lot of just joy in it. And then as I got into, 2-3 years in, I started being invited to race all over the world. And from the time I was little, that was a massive passion of mine, to connect with different cultures and communities and just see the beauty in the world. So the sport in and of itself played to so many things that were just natural to me. A lot of my curiosity and wonder about the human body, this desire to see the beauty in the world and connect with other people. It's been a long journey of learning, though, too. I think there's, for everyone that enters it, whether you're entering from a road marathon background or you're coming from CrossFit, there's some big learning curves in it, because you can't, it's not a sport that you can like dial in on a spreadsheet like you could, let's say, for an Ironman or a 10K race. There's so many variables. And I think the most flexible people who are good at problem solving typically do the best in the sport.
And obviously there's got to be an incredible mental battle. You talked about, between the years there, when you run a race like the Badwater 135, are there any tactics that you use to kind of maintain kind of that mental mindset? Because I'm sure and maybe if you're more dialed now, maybe not so much, but I have to think even in the earlier years that there's probably a little bit of a roller coaster of emotions in your head, of like maybe some buyer's remorse of what did I just sign up for, and you're like 15 miles in, and you're like, and it's so I guess what methods do you use to kind of stay mentally strong in those moments? And I would imagine those tactics are probably applicable, in everyday life as well.
Oh yeah, big time. I mean, don't get me wrong, like those first few years is where I also experienced the most DNS, which is a did not finish. And you learn from those. And I like to talk about that a lot. Just, whether you fail, you drop out, it's valuable. There's something you learn about yourself. There's something you look back on, you're like, why did I actually do that? When 10 minutes after DNFing, I felt fine. And then you have this regret. But you learn a really valuable lesson about yourself. Like maybe I was a little bit weak there. I was craving so much to be comfortable. I was freezing up in the Rockies and I just wanted to be warm, and I couldn't take it anymore at 1 a.m. And so then you learn about yourself, whether it's, I could have been better prepared with the better gear. I need to be better at being uncomfortable, get comfortable with being uncomfortable. It's a really popular phrase people say. And then your weaknesses are exposed in so many ways. So maybe it's, gosh, my hips always break down at mile 30. Okay, I need to work more on my hips, or, my knees start hurting, my ankles start, like, where are all the weaknesses? Okay, I'm going to go back to the board now, and I'm going to strengthen everything. And I'm going to remember how bad it felt to DNF. And I don't ever want to feel that again. So I'm going to train harder. And so I think overall, like, the mental aspect of the setbacks make you better for the future races. And when I won Badwater in 2021, I had been competing professionally at that time for 7 years, and I had a wealth of ups and downs that I was able to pull from in order to get me to the finish line in first place, because I went into that race insanely fit. I knew what I was capable of running on that course. You're on road that whole time, so you actually can kind of dial down your pace a little bit better. The heat definitely screws you up a bit, but you can map out what you're able to do on that course a little bit better than when you're just running in the mountains. And so I had this goal. I'm gonna run this. I wanted to run a sub 28-hour race. And I really wanted to finish in first place. Unfortunately, about mile 13, my intestines got, I don't know if I was sick going in and didn't know it, if I got progressively sick, if I had eaten something, but I had diarrhea the entire race.
Oh no.
And I remember being furious. Like I was angry. It wasn't like a woe's me. It wasn't like, what am I going to do? It was like, are you kidding me? I trained so hard for this. But here's the thing. When I first ran Badwater was in 2018, and a lot of things went wrong that year. And kind of the same thing. I went in very fit, very strong. I wanted to win. I ended up getting 7th place. I did not do a good job with my electrolytes. So I dealt with horrible lower body cramps for about the last 100 miles of the race. And I was really upset. Then I stepped away from the race for a couple years, and I thought, I'm going to do it right this year. So in the 6-7 weeks leading up to the race, I would fly down. At this time, we were living in Bend, Oregon. I would fly down to the course, and I would stay in Death Valley for 3 or 4 days. And then I would fly back home, and I kept on doing that. And while I would run out on the course, I would envision every possible thing that could go wrong in the race. And I would work through it in my mind. All right, Sally, you have blisters all over your toes. Like, what are you going to do? This is what you're feeling like. What are all the things that we can do for preventative care? And if it still happens, like, how are you going to handle it? Is it worth it to keep going? So then you just talk yourself through physical pain, and what is it worth? How much of that physical pain is worth the win to you? How much of the training that you're doing, does that matter? I mean, you're spending all this time away from your family. Like, the goal has to matter. The goal needs to make sense in your mind. And if you aren't grounded in what it is that you're doing, and you're not aware of the fact that a lot of variables could go sideways, it's really easy to lose steam and confidence on race day. And so I did that for 6 and 7 weeks. So when it did hit it at mile 13, I was like, you got to be kidding me. And I was angry. And then I thought, but I already planned for this, and it's not a big deal. And so every time I saw my crew, because you see your crew like every 2 miles, it's such a dangerous course. They always need to be checking on you, making sure that you have fluid and that you're okay. And so I told them what was going on, and I was like, but it's not a big deal. I'm moving great. My legs are strong. Like, we're in high spirits. I'm stoked. We're going to do this. But it was terrible because every time I'd put fluid in, nutrition, it would come right out. Jeez. And it's very hard to run a race on nothing in your body. And so it was just managing that the entire time. Then when the sun went down and I was about 100 miles in, then it was just vomiting. So it was a bunch of vomiting. And then I finally get to the last 12 miles, and I had been in first place now for since I want to say mile 70 is when I took first place. And so I had been in first place for a while, and there was 12 miles left. I had to get up the mountain, up to Mount Whitney. And that's when I had a breaking point. I was in first place for a long time, but I was so upset that I had missed my time goal, that I would be finishing in first place, but in a much slower time that I had trained. And I remember my pacer coming in behind me, and the stars were out. It was pitch black. It was totally quiet. And we just had this incredible conversation. And then my husband hopped in and paced me for a little bit. And I was 2 miles from the finish line when he hopped in. And I stopped, and I put my hands on my knees. I kind of bent over. I was in a lot of pain. My body was really beat up, pushing for so long on virtually nothing. And I just said, man, I can't believe that I missed that. I missed that goal time. I feel so weak. And he's like, are you kidding me? He's like, I just watched you for a whole day push through every challenge and setback, and you're still in first place. It doesn't matter what your time is. And I think that is just a really beautiful picture of my whole career, of my whole life. And I think it's actually something that a lot of people can relate to. That so often we set off for goals. We set off, from college with so much excitement with how our life is going to turn out, with how we expect it to be. Or we even claim that because we worked so hard, it should go this way. I expect it to. That's what I earned. And it doesn't. real life is met with so many challenges and surprises and losses and heartache. That's actually a real life. But the beauty in all of that is what we choose to do with it and how we respond to it. When things don't go our way, who are we in that? When we lose everything, who are we? And, 2021 was a really powerful year for me, because even though I'd been in the sport for so long, it was my mind that got me to that finish line. And that's also when we started our podcast, Choose Strong. The next year is when I released my book, Choose Strong. And that's really the powerful message that we have really rooted ourselves in, is that you get to choose. That everything can fall apart, but you get to choose that strength. You get to choose to keep writing that story. So I'd say just across the board in ultras, your mind is the most powerful muscle that you have. And it should be something that we work on every single day. And there's a lot of different ways that we can work on it. It's not just showing up to train. It's how we interact with people around us. How do we interact, in just everyday challenges?
Can we just cut?
Yeah,
to the end of it?
that's the mic drop right
Amazing.
there.
Yeah,
so freaking cool, and just humble to be able to talk with you, and share, some of your perspective on all this, because there's so many obviously sport lessons pulled from that, but also I think more so life stuff too. And I'm sure that it's crazy though that you said that you were bummed that you were mad you're missing your split times, when you're you literally have 2 miles left and you're about to win the Badwater 135. You know what I mean? And, it's in the bag and you're thinking about damn it, my time. But hey, that mindset is why you're elite, right? But I'm glad your husband was able to be there to provide you some good perspective. But
yeah, he's a good man.
Well, I think that's all I got, Tony. You got anything else?
Yeah, I love what the last thing you said there, because I really think it is just a bunch of micro moments that culminate into something that starts to make sense. And that's exactly like you saying, hey, this strength thing doesn't mean you're showing up running 30 miles a day. It's how are you approaching every conversation you have? How are you approaching every meal you have, every night you go to sleep? And through that, you build a resiliency that it's less about those goals, less about the achievements, which are always nice. And I think that validation is important, and it's more about the process. And to me, that is that's grounded strength. And I think you embody that. So you sharing your story and kind of giving that insight has been great. I know I enjoyed hearing you talk through some of your trials and tribulations, as well as some of your achievements. So thank you for your time, and appreciate you coming on here and chatting with us.
Yeah. Thank you, you guys. It's been awesome.
All right, everybody. So make sure you check out Sally. We'll put everything in the show notes, but on Instagram, she's at Yellow Runner. She's also got the podcast and the book. So, hopefully you guys got something out of that. I know I did. And yeah, Sally, thank you again so much for taking some time out of your day to be on the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, guys.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Keep
Thanks,
killing
Sally.
it. We'll see you.